right. Recording has been started. Did anybody see any interesting weights on robots this week? People adding weight in an interesting way. The
I saw a
71.
robot that had two nuts on it, about that big around, each of them. Big hex nuts.
I
Hey,
saw
what was that
this.
robot? What was that robot on your side? It looks more like a hexagon. It went past us, and I'm like, whoa! I never seen a.
It was like a home plate. It was a pentagon, but it was a square corner, so it was like a home plate. That was Wave Robotics.
We brought I think about 25 pound chunk of aluminum to the regional with us that we inspected with it, just placed on the robot in case we wanted to put it on at some point. We didn't actually end up using it, but we had it.
Talked to the Minters at 7021, and they ended up replacing all of their aluminum frame, the 1x2, with solid steel 1x2 rod, and then machining
Yikes.
holes through it for their sword modules. So they ended up having solid steel 1x2 around the outside.
Did you guys have a bunch of tipped robot at the Northern Light?
Ian's laughing. Ian, you want to comment on that?
Our robot tipped twice, and we're like a really tiny robot. So it turns out our first tip was like in qualification matches, and so we are set in brake mode for auto, so we can get the auto balance right. But then we didn't switch to coast during teleop for some reason that match. And we found the bug in the code. And so our driver was like going 20 feet a second across the field and then came to a dead stop. And because a lot of our weight is concentrated in the back in the battery, we kind of just, and because it's a drop center drive base, we kind of just tipped backwards and rolled over to our backs. And then in the match before the finals, like I don't know what it's called, but like the last losers bracket match before the finals match, we tipped again, where we were just going really fast that time and we didn't give it enough time to decelerate, and now we're thinking about strategies to put weight on the front of the robot so it doesn't happen again, because we somehow made our tippiest robot and our shortest robot in the same year.
I was sitting up in the stands next to one of the mentors, or maybe it was a student, but somebody said, "Wait a minute, how did emperors tip over there?" I said, "They stopped." You guys just stopped so fast and you rolled right over.
We had quite a during I think two of our matches. The other teams, they tipped over. I mean, they still beat us, but I know they beat us with two robots, and I'm like, goodness gracious. But I mean, one of the robots was a huge robot, and I don't know why they kind of built up sort of like the old farmhouses that just go all the way up, and it went. Every time it happened, I felt bad for the other team, but I'm like, we should use this as an opportunity, but it never worked out very
How
well.
many tips did we have on Lake Superior? I think it was only maybe 4 or 5 total.
I think so.
I'm
think
sorry,
we
on
had-
Northern Lights.
Yoshi's in
On
London,
Northern
bro.
Lights?
Yoshi was there.
I didn't watch most of the qualification. I didn't watch most of the matches, but during practice matches, I felt like I watched like 6 matches and watched like 4 robots tip over. Obviously, that was practice, but I was like, what is going on?
I think there was a lot of very near tips or like tips where people recovered. But severe like, rollovers or anything, there wasn't actually a ton. Tippiness was something that did get measured though.
We had a weird moment where we were moving so quickly that we hit some people and almost tipped them over, and we got a warning from the head ref. It was like, be careful, please. If you do that, we're gonna give you penalties. Like, you're gonna get a red card if you tip someone over. We were like, we are not planning to hit anyone else. Let's just not do that.
Phoebe,
So,
what team are you on?
2491, no mythic.
Okay.
maybe
you guys
slightly
had-
a little bit less recognizable without my extremely purple uniform, but
You guys had an amazing robot. Everybody loves that robot. It was so awesome to watch that robot.
it was fun.
We learned that one of our joysticks has a mapping function,
Oh,
so that
I
when the
heard about
operator
this.
pushes the button, it forgets all of its functions. So he learned not to push that during matches anymore. So we just kind of sat there for the rest of the match. So we learned a lot of things this weekend.
Welcome to my world. Hey, I got a question about joystick and mapping and driving. So, how many drivers do we have in the room? None?
No drivers. Our Nightcrawler drivers aren't on the call.
Okay. So, because I'm considering having us switch our controller to a joystick for the Grid Northern, if he prefers that, because you have a little bit more room, zone of tolerance, and we can just, and you have more buttons you can program too. In that, it's just, I don't know, Scott, you didn't want to help me with most of the code too. So do you think that's a smart move to go with, or just stick with what we got?
It really depends on how comfortable your driver is with a gamepad. My whole thing on a gamepad, because I'm an old guy, is that you have a lot more travel to go from 0 to 100%. With a
Yeah,
gamepad, you have basically a half an inch with
half an
your
inch.
thumb, and then you go from 0 to 100%. Where with the joystick, I feel like you can get a little bit more finesse. But
But can you?
the young people that are playing first person shooters and aiming a sniper rifle tend to have much better dexterity in their thumbs and can actually get the finesse out of those gamepads. So the old guy will say you got to have joysticks, but that's not really true for the people that have a lot of skill with gamepads.
The way I
But
see most kids drive with gamepads is 0 or 100% though. So if you
yeah,
don't want your robot to
that
be driven that way,
exactly. That's what I was gonna say, because, like, when you play Need for Speed, that's those driving video games. You are not going like, oh, I'm gonna just, you just ram into everything. You just, it's like everything or nothing. So if that same mentality applies to your robot, that's. Now, can I ask you a question for programming? Can you program those to go to, even if he goes from 0 to 1? Can that go like the full power of that being like let's say 65%? So then you dampen that a response.
Yes. So I will share how to do that, but do any of the students know the answer to that? So I'm not doing all the talking. Ian does.
So one thing you can do is you can just multiply the overall value your joystick is given by a number that's less than 1, although that's somewhat not ideal because it limits the top overall speed of the robot. But then the other thing you can do, which is more of an acceleration deceleration thing, is you can configure ramps for your drive motors. So it will only ramp up to full in, like, let's say 0.3 or 0.4 seconds. And so those two things can make it more controllable. I will say that I'm thinking about asking our drive team to look into using joysticks for a second regional, just because we are kind of having a slight concern with going from 100 to 0 in short periods of time.
There's another option too. Does anyone know the other option before I spout it out?
I
In
do, but
code,
I'm
as a
also a
coding.
mentor. Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, go ahead,
This
Andrew.
the slew rate limiter would
The
be
slew
your
rate
other
limiter. Yeah,
option.
slew
Yep,
rate
it's a
limiter.
filter that's built into WPI lib. You can
Yeah.
tell it how fast can you go from 0 to 100, and it applies in both directions. And so you feed your values into that, and it will cap them. You have to watch out if you're switching between, like, if you have a mode that does something with the drivetrain, and you switch back and forth. Like last year, we had our robot; it would shoot the ball. Well, if you were going 100% and you went to shoot, it would stop you still right away. So you have to watch out for stuff like that. But the slew rate limiter is a good option.
Yeah, it basically dampens your joystick input. That's what we use. We use the slew rate limiter for KnightKrawler. We also use 2 joysticks. We flight sticks. And for swear, we used to do split arcade where when we were doing tank drive, one joystick would go forward and backward, and the other joystick would go left and right. That way, if you wanted to drive perfectly straight, it didn't matter what you were doing left and right on the back and forth one. You couldn't turn left and right unless you were moving the other joystick. And we used that split arcade model for a really long time. And now that we're doing swerve, we do forward, backward, left, and right with this joystick, and then rotation to spin with this other joystick. And the students seem to prefer that model.
Is there? I guess this is probably a question because I haven't messed around with slew rate limiters too much. So, is there a difference between setting a ramp like config open loop ramp out on the motor versus creating a slew limiter specifically?
Andrew, do you know?
It would apply in both directions would be the biggest thing that I could think of. The slew rate limiter also, like you said, going from 100 to 0, it would also decelerate.
Do ramps not do that? Question mark. Because I thought they did, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't think so. But yeah, that'd be something to look up.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
I'm just like, now I have so many questions for my programmers and drive team about why we're doing what we're doing because I have no idea and I totally trust them, but now I'm very curious. I think we're using 2 Xbox controllers or something for both of our drivers, and I don't know why or what that means. So I'd like to know now.
We have a custom. Well, we've been using a custom button panel that if you build an arcade machine, like an old Pac-Man type machine, you can buy the buttons on Amazon and build your own basically button box. And we've had one for a long time, but we built a brand new one this year. Our secondary driver who uses the button panel made his own controller this year because he's on the build team and decided to make it. And that's nice. Our buttons were starting to wear out in the old one, and last year we had some reports of some pulling too many amps, so there must have been like a solder joint that was breaking or something. But we really like that button panel. We used to use a joystick for our secondary driver, and they would basically only just use it to press the buttons around the joystick. But that secondary button panel has been great since we switched to that. It's really nice.
Yeah, we have one of those too.
Ultraviolet
And
was next to us, and they had a button panel that was probably 18 inches wide and had 20 some buttons on it. It was crazy.
I think I've seen one of those sitting in a box somewhere in our shop.
Ian, I think I cut you off. Were you saying something?
yeah, our team also switched to a button box last year. That our code team made, and it's been really helpful for our drive team.
When you're deciding who is going to be on drive team, we always do driver tryouts. I don't know if other teams do that. I guess I was assuming it, but maybe not. I am just thinking about the fact that part of those tryouts is we've already decided what system we're using, I think, before then. I don't know. How does the system that they're being tested on affect how well they do? I don't know where I'm going with this, but because I know we've used multiple different systems in the past, and
that's a really good point. I guess on the KnightKrawler side, we've just always used joysticks, and so that's just what our drivers test on. And all of our kids that run demos and drive the robot for demos, they just drive up there, and this is how I drive the robot with these 2 joysticks. Honestly, I don't know that we've ever had a student come up and say, "Hey, I'd like to use a gamepad instead." I think we would let them if they could prove that they could drive better with a gamepad. I don't know why we wouldn't let them.
This is kind of going back to the slew rate limiter, because thinking about coding deceleration, because I know that our driver has said that he would rather us not touch how the robot accelerates right now, because he said it's working for him really well. So is there a way to make it so a robot decelerates slower, but doesn't without changing the acceleration?
I don't know the answer to that.
because like the only way I was thinking is just taking the absolute value of the previous frame, and if it's getting closer to 0 by a certain amount, then you'll reduce that. But that seems probably overly complicated and could induce a lot of bugs.
I don't know that you'd see a lot of lag in doing an if statement on that, but possibly. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we can figure that out while we're on the call here. Let's take a look at the documentation.
Hey Scott, why you can you multitask? Why you do that?
What's up?
So you saw that robot, and if we're going for defense and trying to not do a lot of a construction thing, if we went in and like cut off the top and reduce the height a little bit, and because I just meant bracket plate that we can just take off and then use sawzall to kind of chop off some of that, so kind of like reduce the tipping nature of it. Would that be something you advise for the little time that we have? My wife says severely no.
I think what I think I would do, just Jeremiah, if you're trying to really kind of pare back the complexity of your robot, I think I would look at what the emperors did, and I think I would look at what No Mythic did, and see if you can just change your robot so that you could pick up a cube or a cone that's on the ground and deliver it to a scoring place on the ground. I think if you're really considering chopping things off, I would look at making it just so that it stands straight up and it comes over the bumper, picks up a cone or a cube, and then just goes back up and you deliver it low.
No, the concern with the height is with the inexperienced nature of my driver. Like the hard stops, and I went in there and I reduced the speed of the drivetrain, and because he's just making a lot of hard stops. And
Well, put in the slew rate limiter first of all. Do that and drive with it and
okay,
see, because you can eliminate the hard stops, right? So if you eliminate the hard stops, does it solve all your problems without creating a build task?
yeah, that's because we only have, if we're fortunate, 3 days before we're back on the road.
Is anybody else competing week 2 after having competed week 1?
This crazy guy here.
I'm volunteering week 2 again.
I
Oh,
feel like I
Scott,
talked to somebody who is, but not on this call.
I feel like there should be a number of teams that were in Duluth that are also going to Great Northern because they don't want to drive all the way to Iowa or all the way to La Crosse.
Sartell's gonna be there.
Okay.
I have a feeling they're going to back out. I think Ryan said if they won in Duluth, they were going to back out of Great Northern, and
Oh no, they're
they
gonna
won
be
in
there.
Duluth. So
I
but
spoke
we'll
with
see.
him this morning. They're
Oh,
gonna
is he
be
still
there.
planning to go?
Yeah.
Cool. Be good practice.
John, what do you do? What do you do as a volunteer?
A robot inspector.
Oh, you know what? You should come to my booth first and pass me inspection second. Hey, I just
Hey, if everything's ready and to go
I-
and
yeah.
you passed, then we can do that. You just have to bring the robot up first thing.
Actually, I found out one of my hoses is leaking, so the kids have to, change that.
Well, does anybody have any general thoughts on Duluth in general, or plans to change their strategy based on what they learned in Duluth? I mean, we didn't really have an agenda for this call other than how did Duluth go. So, anyone radically doing something different on their team? Oh, Phoebe's laughing, and Ian's got a hand.
We
Go
haven't made
ahead.
any decisions yet, but I mean,
We
we went
we
to
haven't-
Duluth. Well, having an arm sitting in our shop, like the plan has been to put the arm on for Minneapolis. And I just know that we are going to have a very interesting conversation on Thursday about what we're doing now. So that's why I'm laughing. But we haven't decided any changes or anything. We're like letting it simmer until Thursday, and then
So
we
tell
talk.
us more about this arm. What does your arm look like, and does it score medium and high, or just medium?
Rasmus is on this call, right? Rasmus, you can speak to this way better than I can.
Yeah, so we made a double jointed arm that it's mounted to one side of the robot, so weight is a bit goofy there, but it works. It like we checked all the math, it works. And so we spent the past 2 weeks getting it up and running. So the geometry works out where it can pick up from the ground and the whatchamacallit, the human player station, the shelf, and then it can score on all 3 levels. So in theory, it does everything. It's just a matter of actually getting it to do those things now. So yeah,
Well, you have 3 weeks, right? You'll know in 3 weeks whether you need to put what you had in Duluth back on the robot or keep your arm, I suppose. I think it'd be cool if you could do both, but if you have an arm that tall, you probably can't drive as crazy as you were driving in Duluth.
yeah, and we have posted about it in Open Alliance. So there's some info there and some CAD models there. So if any of y'all wanna check that out, yeah.
I do think we'll probably be a little bit slower, probably. One would imagine.
I think you would have to be. I think if your center of gravity was 4 inches taller, you would flip over because you guys drive so fast. I can't believe how fast
Well,
that robot
also we
is.
were able to drive so fast because we were so light.
No, that's true.
That was another big part of the story, because we were, from what we heard, we were the lightest robot there. But we
So
didn't
now
come
you
in that way.
guys,
There was another robot that came in lighter, but then they added weight because they were
How much did the robot weigh in online?
How much did our robot weigh?
Yeah.
Our robot was 53 pounds before bumpers and battery and 72 pounds after.
Wow.
We had a lighter robot on Lake Superior. We had one that clocked in at 41 pounds.
Wow.
But
Right now we are at
Superior
93
across,
pounds, and I'm
60
trying to
teams.
buck it up.
Yeah, 60 teams at Lake Superior. We were at 6,371 pounds total weight.
so average weight is about 100 pounds.
106.18 pounds.
Just to be exact, Scott. Come on.
I liked your swerve statistics. Can you share those swerve statistics, John? I thought that was really telling about how much either the teams have matured or how aggressive they've gotten in trying new things.
Who are you looking for those from?
Didn't you post something about how many teams had swerved last year and how many had this year? Let
Nope,
me go look in
that
that.
wasn't me.
Somebody posted it in the Minnesota FRC Slack. I don't have it in front of me.
No, I haven't been in the Slack for a while.
Oh, I thought for sure. I thought I read that last year at Northern Lights there were 8 teams of swerve, and this year there were almost half. Dang it! Now I'm gonna have to.
That won't surprise me. There were a lot of swerve robots.
It was
That
John
was-
Schmidt.
John Schmidt.
Oh.
Wrong John.
Okay, so what's the stats? That way I don't have to open my Slack.
It said, well, which stats do you want? Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Sure, why not? I thought they were really interesting.
Okay. So, or I could just copy and paste it into the chat. That would probably be easier than me saying it out
I
loud.
can read it at their
Nobody
leisure
can
then.
follow what I'm saying.
Certainly easier for me to put in the notes.
There you go. All right, Ian, what you were gonna say something too when PB was
Yeah,
talking about their
something
changes. What are you guys thinking?
that I was not anticipating going into the event was triple offense might not be as bad of a strategy as I thought it was going to be going into Duluth. I know that the Alliance, our team was on, we ran triple offense throughout the match because I think we were each scoring a third of our points and we just couldn't sacrifice any of our robots to go and play defense. And I know that in the strategy meetings, I was concerned about the Alliance station area getting really clogged up, which we seem to actually avoid pretty well. And I think it's partially because robots that can feed from the chute don't really clog up that area as much as all of the other robots. And I think that we'll see more triple offense if we can see more robots that can cycle over the charge station as well as feed in from that chute area.
Yeah, I agree. I expected there to be a lot more defense than there was. So, at least on Northern Lights, I thought I I, I didn't like you, Ian. I did not expect there to be that many triple offense matches.
Hey, question here. Did any of you guys know how how um how often did you see a triple charge station in the end game? Because most of them that I saw, it was just not working. Out of the third robot would be on a like half on, half off. And I told my kids, don't risk it. If you can't get on there safely, we have another week to go. The last thing we can afford is a robot that has a lot of broken parts.
Yeah, I think from what I saw in the stands, it was 50-50. And I think something that we talked about as a team was unless the triple balance is necessary for getting the ranking point or winning the match, it's a lot safer to do 2 balance in a park and maybe possibly have another robot like score one more time than risk no or very few points if one of your robots falls off.
Yeah, the triple balance is definitely a really risky thing, especially depending on the robots you have. Like, I know that for the alliance that we were on, we, because of our lower scoring capabilities, we had to nail the triple balance in most of our matches. I know, especially like the first playoff match we played, where it was down to a 5-point match. It was like almost we had to do it to win. So I know we took some more time, like to make sure that we are all lined up and doing it. But I think when you have 3 larger robots, it can definitely be tricky, especially when there's one that is expected to like swerve off the edge by like 1 wheel. That can cause it to fall off. And I know from our perspective, right? I think that risk was kind of like you didn't want to have to take that risk, but if you had to take that risk, you want to be able to make sure that that risk you could take would work. Like, I know that our plan for the finals matches, which ultimately did not work out, was to try and pressure the 1 seed alliance, which had 3 larger swerve robots, to have to try and do the triple balance. And then
fail.
But that didn't really that didn't really work out. We were supposed to win the second match, but our auto also didn't work at that match. It's a whole thing.
I just did a quick count for Northern Lights, and out of the 89 calls matches, I did it really fast, but I think we had 90 of the charge station bonuses. So someone, was that you, Lexi, that you thought like half the time there was a triple balance? I would say if we did what turns out to be on average, every match had at least on average there was a balance ranking point for the match. I would say probably, yeah, half of those were probably triple balances. It seemed to be pretty common in Northern Lights.
Because I had another mentor advice made to tell my driver, if you can practice, because we have a tank drive, so we can't go side to side. It's like if you can practice going up and then kind of like making a slight 90-degree turn where you can then slide off on there. But I'm like, that's a lot of risk, with falling over. And maybe we can try that in practice on the practice field where somebody can stand on our side, make sure that the robot doesn't entirely fall over, because I mean it's worth, if you can do that, that makes you just trying to figure out different ways that I can make our team a bit appealing more as a rookie team. Just seeing like, hey, we may not lack mechanism, we may lack scoring mechanism efficiency, but we can deliver in other areas to be of an asset to any other team out there. That's kind of what why I asked that question.
Yeah, and the other thing, Jeremiah, that you can do too is if you do split arcade driving, so one joystick goes forward and backward and the other one goes turn, even if you do that with a gamepad, because you have two
Hmm.
joysticks on your gamepad,
Hmm.
then you can drive up there to get balanced, and then you can use the other joystick, which should just turn you in place,
Hmm.
because you won't have the risk of accidentally moving forward or backward.
Hmm.
So doing that split arcade drive can say, I want to guarantee that I'm only going forward or backward, and the other one's saying I only want to turn. And if
Hmm.
all you're doing is turning, in theory you should be turning in place. So you shouldn't unbalance the charge station. It depends on how your robot's weighted and where your center of gravity is and all that business, but it might not be as hard as you think it's going to be. You should definitely try it.
And that's one of the reasons why, because initially one of the dads was like, hey, maybe we can chop this up and just bring you. Do you notice how robot last year seemed a little bit lopsided? We'll find out that, well, we didn't meet the parameter requirement, and then we had to we sawed it in half and like pieced it back together. So this year we were very quite conscientious about that. And so when Bill suggested that, but see, the thing with a base of a robot, you have a lot of hardware on the top. So you start cutting things, and you got to take your electronic tray, and then that one and that one and that one, your gearbox. It becomes, I can't get that done in 3 days. And that
Yeah,
because
right.
my goal is to give Ty and what's his name, Wyatt, and give them tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, before we get on the road to get to just driving and knowing like, hey, this is how this thing feels to be going at this speed, and this is how I want to start. My plan is when they're driving in the gym, I would throw a garbage can in their way. How do you respond to that? How do you respond to that, to a recycling bin thrown in front of you? You are not allowed to drag it around the field. So I know. Sounds crazy, but that's the plan. I would take any word of wisdom.
Well, my advice is figure out what you can do in half the time you think you have, right? Figure out what you think you can do in half the time you think you have and do that, and hopefully you'll actually get it done. And there's a lot that can be substituted for good driver practice. So the more driver practice you have, the less mechanical and code stuff you have to do. Drivers can compensate for a lot of things if you get them enough practice.
Drivers can be wild. Our 2020, I like think about this all the time. Our 2020 robot, right, that we like won Duluth with KnightKrawler, right? Our driver was manually operating our like what's this called? The thing that actually moved the game pieces inside of our robot was like a little like
Hopper. Yeah.
conveyor belt
Yeah.
situation. Like it was literally a conveyor belt, and we never got the sensors to work. And so he manually operated the thing the entire competition. And I like remain baffled to this day about how he was like so successful in getting it to jam so few times. And I like have to believe that it comes down to just like the many, many hours of driver practice he spent doing it beforehand. So driver's practice can be very helpful.
Didn't you guys have to like fix your take the bottom of your robot off in finals every match in Duluth that year? I
It's
feel like
quite
between every
possible. I remember that being very dramatic. I was just taking pictures though.
I feel like there was something on your climber where after every match in finals you took a wheel off your robot so you could reach up inside to reset something.
Oh
And
yeah,
we
I mean
were
I think we had to reset like the strings on the climber.
Yeah, something like that. We were freaking out every match because they're like, are they gonna get the wheel back on in time? What are we gonna do? How we gotta get back out there? And you guys did it. You guys were masters of the pit. It was incredible how fast you guys were able to take a wheel off your robot, change something, and put the wheel back on between finals matches. Oh, that was a crazy year. It would have been nice if we could have finished that year out.
Yeah. But then again, like people will tell me, like students from our team who weren't there that year will be like, oh, if we had finished that year, we would have like done so amazing and it would have been so great. And I'm like, you don't realize how lucky we were that all came together. Like that was not guaranteed.
Yeah, that was a hard year for us too. That was the most complex robot I think we've ever built. And what our secondary driver, she was running the climber all manually because our encoders had slipped or something. And so for the first 3 or 4 matches in playoffs, she was doing everything manually, and she was our lead programmer as well. So she knew exactly how all the overrides did, all the overrides worked. And then she finally told somebody saying, "Yeah, I don't think our encoder is hooked up." And we're like, "Well, why did you say something?" And she's like, "That's okay. I just run the overrides. I know how to do it." She was amazing. She was one of our great programming captains and great secondary drivers too. One thing I think is interesting, I was looking at the stats here, but I don't think there was any 4 ranking point matches on Lake Superior, but I think there were 9 on Northern Lights.
No, we did not have one at all.
Wow.
We were 1 cone away twice, but we never got one.
I felt
Your
like
team, David,
We
your
were
team
1
was
cone away once, and Esco was 1 cone away once in their alliance.
Wow. I think we missed a 4 point. We got 2 4 point matches, 4 ranking point matches, and I think we missed 2 others by 1 cone.
we were close to getting a couple 2 or 4 ranking point matches on ours. I think there was one where we were 1 away from 5 links, but the other team didn't do the cooperation.
Yeah.
And then the other one, I think either 1 away from getting it or we messed up the balance. I forget. But it felt like overall this year, because usually Lake Superior, from my very short window of having viewed first competition, usually looks like Lake Superior is the overall more competitive regional, like, with Hilltoppers, a couple other teams. But it felt like this year, looking at the statistics, it looked like Northern Lights was a very, very tough regional.
We had that's a good point, Ian, that we had done 4 links a couple of times, but then our opponents didn't do the competition links, and so we didn't get the ranking points there. But I believe in I think it was in our last quals match, we got 6 links. Our alliance got 6 links in our last quals match. And I think we got 6 links several times in our playoff matches, but you have your better robots in playoffs, so that makes more sense. But we did have a quals, I think, where we got 6 links.
Yeah, that is a good match.
Actually, was that with you guys, Ian?
Yeah. Yeah, we did the bottom.
It was
I did
with
most of the bottom,
it
and
was
you
with
did
No
most of the
Mythic.
top. Yeah.
Yes, it was with No Mythic. That's the one that we got the 6th with. Yes, that's right. You guys filled the bottom, and we filled almost all of the top, and their alliance partner
It was
put up a
very
couple on top.
exciting. It was very fun for our drivers. I remember seeing them afterwards, and they were just like, I was like, you did so good.
I think we might have gotten the high score on that match too, or maybe the high score before finals.
Yeah, it was before playoffs. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Well, I think at the time that was the high score. I don't know if anybody beat us after that one.
We might have.
So does anybody else besides No Mythic and Emperors have a plan for changes for after this regional before the next one? Joseph, you're laughing. What's so funny? Are you doing big changes?
Well,
Joseph's on No Mythic.
yes.
Me and Rasmus
Sorry.
and Joseph are all captains of No Mythic, and we're just all here right now.
I got it. All right.
Yeah.
I forgot. I did know that Joseph was on No Mythic. I forgot about that. I think that we decided that the mentors were talking, but I think the mentors have decided that all of the changes we need to do are code based. We don't feel like we have to change anything mechanically. So we're going to put the pressure on our programmers to make some
Yeah,
updates to the
I think
code.
it's the same here with us. It's all code.
We got to get our vision systems working. We didn't
So-
have any vision.
So Scott, I can harass you later about balancing stuff and auto balancing stuff and vision. We got it wired in, but I haven't been able to recall the vision to the driver station.
I will direct you to a student on my team that you can harass about the limelight,
All right,
and a different student you can harass about the balancing code. I have 2 freshmen that wrote our balancing code this year. I'd love to have them talk to you.
sounds great.
Yeah, we also had a freshman code our balance code. I thought that it was a really good challenge for newer coders to figure out how to do, taking feedback from a non-encoder sensor and figuring out how to utilize it, which I thought it was like the perfect mix of like, it's a little tricky, but it's not, so tricky it gets discouraging, and like, they can clearly see, oh my, okay, it's oscillating and overshooting, right? And it's like a really good, I think, piece of feedback where it's like you can very clearly, see how it's working. I liked giving that challenge to the freshman RT, and they did great because our auto bounce, when the pneumatic system wasn't broken and driving us halfway across the field into the other charge station, it worked every time we got onto the charge station.
When we were practicing our balance code for the very first time, we put a button on the secondary panel, so you hold the button down and it would do the auto balance code. And it worked in the very first try, and they got all excited. They were jumping around and high-fiving this and that. I'm like, all right, let's try it again. And then we couldn't get it to work for the next 6 tries. But we finally got it worked out. I was surprised. One of the things that really surprised me is that I did not think our plywood charge station that we had made at home for the week 0 field was going to be very representative of the real thing. And then we got there, and I was like, wow, this is just as hard as the plywood one we made. I was really surprised how close it was to the real thing.
Did you
Did
use,
not
I'm sorry, I
expect
don't
that.
actually fully understand what this means, but I kept like hearing people on our team talking about this, and they had this question, so now I'm curious. Did you like make hinges for your charge station, your wood charge
We
station?
did. We made
Okay.
them out of 1-inch steel tubing. And so we followed the spec. It was I can't remember. It was 6 one of them was 6 inches, and then the other two were 6 3/4, I think. And so you had about a 7 or an 8 inch sort of center of gravity thing on there. But you couldn't just use regular barrel hinges where there was just a pin. You had to make it with 2 pivot points in order to mimic the real charge station. They
Yeah.
said in the field build instructions, they said that you could either make it out of hardwood or solid steel block. And so I had a whole bunch of hickory left over in my shop from a project, so I made them all out of hickory, and then we put them together, and we didn't trust it to hold up for an entire week 0. So then we went and we bought some
Yeah.
hollow steel square tubing, and that actually worked really well. And like I said, I was really surprised how similar it was.
Yeah, I think we CNC'd a bunch of, oh God. Never mind. Don't worry about that. Okay. We CNC'd a bunch of hinges for the practice field at HCPA. And that took a while. So that's why I was wondering about it.
Yeah, we just used square steel tubing, and so we just put it on the drill press and drilled a hole in the right spot. CNCing sounds like a better project though, but I think the square
It
steel
certainly kept some of
tubing.
our students busy for
Yeah, because
an
it's a
amount of
lot. I
time.
made it all out of hickory, and it took me almost an entire afternoon to get everything clamped up and glued, and then run through the table saw. I wish we'd have just went and bought steel stock to begin with.
I know our team bought the ones from Andy Mark, because we wanted to make sure it was, well, we were only building a half charge station, so we only had to get 2 of the hinges. But we were burned last year by the hub a bit with the bounce out. So we were like being very cautious on trying to get field replica things, and of course this year turns out that the field replica was pretty close to the actual thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I was really nervous about that. We didn't even consider buying those hinges because we had to build two full charge stations, and it would have been like $1,200 just in hinges. So we knew that we had to make them.
I just sitting in the stands noticed that there was a lot of FTAs going out and fixing the charge station, and I was just wondering from other people's observations what we thought kind of were the most sticking points and breaking points for the charge station, just to be aware of going into further competitions. Because I feel like I heard Pete talking about at one point there was like a certain side that we were happy to not be on because the charge station, or maybe it was the cable box, was like different or weird. I don't
The
know.
blue
That could be.
side's charge station was broken for
Mm.
just about all of Northern Lights. And it's interesting because I definitely haven't been watching the Kineme Port Regional right now. They had to go to a finals 5 because there was a tie and then both alliances won, but then in finals 4, one of their charge stations got stuck. So finals 5 just finished. It was like a 3-point match. But like it seems like it's kind of been a constant thing where if the charge station, like if this thing goes over the lip, then it gets stuck there. And I think what causes that to happen is if there's a robot on the charging station and another one rams into it from the other side, I think that's what's been inducing the failure state. I could be wrong, but
It can also be caused by oscillation on the charge station. So if you have two people trying to auto balance and they keep overcorrecting, that charge station will bounce up and down real rapidly, and that lip will just flip underneath.
Our first auto balancing auto did like the tipping it back and forth like super dramatically, and we ran it like 3 times. So I hope that didn't create issues, but I remember watching that because I had never seen it before it was on the field. I don't even know if I don't know what the practicing it did, but they like because we drove over to get the mobility and then came back onto balance, and so it was already like moving a little bit, and it was so dramatic. I was like, "What is going on? Are we going to balance?" And then we balanced. I was like, "Okay."
I have an idea of something I want to try because I think we got the balance in auto all at once, but when we were doing our testing on our real one, we had the same thing where you just went too far, and it seemed like when you had just reached the point where you could cause it to tip, you were already past the balance point the other way, especially when we added all the weight to our robot that we had. And I wonder if we could drive at an angle on the charging station so that as you drive, you 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 drive slower. You can maintain the speed that you need to maintain, but you're actually moving forward at a slower amount because it's at an angle. And I wonder if that would stop the momentum from actually bringing your robot down too. It's kind of scary to drive at an angle on the charge station, but it is 8 feet wide. I think we should try that.
We haven't had a competition yet, so I don't know how it's going to work. But what we did that was working in the shop is read the acceleration. You can get the data from the gyro that just tells you in degrees per second in each direction. And we just said drive forward at a slow speed until you detect that you're rotating more than I think it was 10 degrees per second, and then stop because you're already moving. And then we don't drive the other direction. We don't overshoot. But we'll see how that works. We compete this week.
We did that in our code on our charging station home. We did exactly that. That as soon as you see it start to tip down, so your angle is tipping down, stop. But as you tip down, I think what was happening is that momentum was causing the robot to shift forward, and now you're
Oh, it was
over the
still
center
over.
again. But I
Sure.
wonder if we were to do it sort of at an angle, if it would tip down and not slide forward nearly as much.
And that was going to be my question, actually, like, that you said it that way, because considering that I want to add weight to our robot, and if we were to go down that route, how to balance that weight so that when it stops and it's not on a heavy end, and then even though your wheels are locked, but you can still slide, and if the things start to tip, even slightly. So that's
Well, what Andrew said was 100%. I think what you should do is that you should watch that pitch angle on the gyro, and as soon as you notice that it's starting to move forward, just stop the robot and put the wheels in brake mode, and then from there, then you have to get creative if that doesn't work.
what we did for our auto balance code. So we were thinking about doing the getting the rate of change of the pitch, but that was like our second plan if what our freshman coders came up with didn't work. So what they came up with was basically it was a PID loop that ran as long as, or actually it was just a P loop, I guess. Yeah, it was just a P loop that ran if the angle was greater or less than 5 degrees. And the reason why that number was chosen was because it actually stops when it's because it's considered bounced at 2.5 degrees. So what that angle kind of let you do was that 5, or I think it actually might have been 6 at Cobb. But when it was at that angle, that was kind of like the midway between it was kind of already shifting down and we were going slow enough where it kind of stopped it just preemptively enough. And it seemed to be successful. And unless we set up the robot wrong, we didn't really have to, it didn't really shift back and forth much when we were running that code.
Hey, Andrew, where are you going to be?
We're going to be at Great Northern.
Oh, see you in a few days.
Yep. We'll be up there.
I will say that before we added 30 pounds of steel plate in the bottom of our robot, and when we tested our auto balancing code when the robot was light, everything worked great. And then we put all that weight in the robot, and then suddenly things didn't work anymore. And we tried and we tried and we tried, and we finally did get it to work. But that's why I sort of think that momentum is what was hurting us, because when we added that extra weight to the robot, now the wheels started to slide. I think it's just a theory, but I think that's what was causing our problems, was that extra weight was making it a lot harder to balance. Because you also had to have more power to get up the hill, right? Because you're heavier. So that extra weight does make a big difference.
Speaking of, construction and also, mechanism, mechanical things. So one of the problems we have, of the million problems we had over the weekend, was our electronic tray on the bottom is made out of, polycarbon. Those the one with the holes that Andy marks out, and so I thought it was a genius idea because it's flexible. It can go back and forth, and it's already got holes in it, and so you can just tie things down. Well, our air compressor, that was not a genius idea, was also placed on that, and so every time you went around the air compressor, up and down, and kids trying to go up on the charging station, and I could see our electronics falling in the bottom, and I'm like, oh, holy cow. And so we moved the air compressor off of that, but I'm not sure if that's gonna hold enough, or should we just take that out and put a good old pegboard under that, something sturdy that's not fluctuating back and forth. What do you guys think? I really don't, and to be honest with you, I don't want to do any construction. I want to focus on my kids driving that robot. So if any advice I can, which, not saying, oh, tell me what I want to hear, because that's not good advice. But if it is not, if you think it's not going to be a big deal, because we competed with that, like, that way for 4 matches, and it was not an issue. And so if you think we can go for another, 6 to 8 qualified matches and some practices and not be a problem.
Are you saying it was just bouncy?
It was not just bouncy. So it came, never mind. I think I can have us fix that. I think what happened was that they didn't bolt them down on, some of the areas on the frame. So if we actually put bolts through that, it should be just fine.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you
you could
secure
do
it
that.
properly, it should be
Yeah.
just fine. We have a larger compressor on ours, and it's just a polycarbonate belly pan that it's mounted on. But we also put some additional aluminum strips specifically underneath that to provide a little bit more
Heat sink.
security to that.
Oh yeah, what do you guys use for heat sink for your compressor?
We don't. We're using the Bayer 250C IG, which is rated for continuous duty. So it actually works a lot better than that 90C one that a lot of teams use, the real tiny one.
Okay. That's what we got. I had it sit on a stainless steel plate, so I wonder if that would help to, you know. Another team recommended to use one of those how you call it, computer fans that they sell, just dedicated to cooling it off.
Is it overheating?
Well, it's running quite more often, but that could be because either there's a leak in the system
Yeah,
or
fix your leaks. Yeah,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
fix your leaks first.
I have something
Nate,
totally unrelated, but I have to leave in 3 minutes. And I just was thinking of something else I learned from this regional that might be of interest. I had never, I'm sure it's happened before, but I hadn't personally seen drivers get accommodations in order to be able to drive. And our drive team had 2 accommodations that allowed them to actually drive that we were able to get relatively easily. So our main driver has a shattered knee and really can't stand for long periods of time. And we were able to get a chair that was tall enough that he could sit on and use to be able to be in a the same position as somebody who is standing and drive the whole match. And then our drive coach is just extremely short, and so we could not see over our drivers. And we got again the accommodation that we could have a stool for him to stand on during the matches, and we checked them obviously.
That is really nice.
And I don't think we would have had an effective drive team without those 2 accommodations. And so knowing that is something that is possible and shouldn't stop people from being able to be drivers is something that I wanted to make sure other people know.
that's really good to hear. Last year, our driver was so tall that the pole across the top was right in his eye line. We should have asked for a stool for him because he had to drive like this.
So he could see over the plexiglass.
Yeah, I don't know how tall Graham was, but he was 6'8" or something like that. Crazy.
But you notice in the reveal video that it was quite. I noticed that after I watched it for the second time, one of the drivers in that video is in a wheelchair. I think that's the message, kind of trying to say we will accommodate anything to make sure that everyone has an equal participation. So that's really neat that it did that for you guys.
I have to head out, but thank you so much.
Same here.
Joining, Phoebe.
See you later.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, guys, for the heads up and the warning and the word of wisdom. Always good.
Well, does anyone have anything else they want to share? Otherwise, it's 8 o'clock. We could wrap up a little earlier than we typically do.
I was just going to loop back on the slew rate limiter. I posted a link in there. It does have separate configuration for forward and backward. So for acceleration and deceleration. So you could just set acceleration to maximum and then put something for the minimum if you want.
For dampering how on the hard stops, is that
right? How Ian was asking, can we not change the acceleration but change the deceleration? It does have separate settings for that.
You put it on your joystick inputs, so it's way up in robot container typically. Well, I mean, you could also pass the raw inputs into your drivetrain and do them there, but yeah, you do it on your basically your incoming values.
So you'd put them in I just haven't worked with them before, but so because the way we have it is we have a default command that goes to the split arcade drive that gets Xbox controller left Y and Xbox controller right X. So I'd put I'd do slew limiter Xbox one feeding it into the command that does the driving in the subsystem.
Give me a second. I'll just bring up our code.
Yeah, I think we have ours in the command. I was looking in there too, but
I
think it's in the command. It could be in the robot container if it goes into the command, or you could have it in the command.
I think ours might be in the command too. Drive command. Let me go find that. I think last year it was in robot container. We had a method that said get X, get Y in robot container, but this year it looks like it got moved into the command, which is probably the better place to put it.
Yep.
Yeah, that
Here's ours. It's in the command. Yep.
Oh, you've already open sourced your code.
We've had ours open all season. We started drivetrain over the summer and had it open source, so we've been using it ever since.
I'm looking for methods. Oh, there it is. Okay, let me share my code. Share my screen. How does that work? Here we go. Need to share this screen. So I don't know how small that is. I wonder here if I can make my browser window bigger. Here we go. So this is in our drive command. So we've got our default drive command right here. And then down here in our drive method, we call this method called slew axis, and we take the raw input. Or no, we have the slew rate limiter is our first parameter, and then we do the deadband as well, so that we can ignore really small values in case our joysticks don't center perfectly. And then this business right here actually applies the limiter to calculate. Does that make any sense at all, Ian?
Yeah, so you'd create a new so where are you putting the value of how much it's limited? Is that
So this is the declaration of the slew rate
Yep.
limiter. Oh yeah, and then where do we set it?
Would it be x
Here.
limiter
Oh,
equals new?
there. 2. I don't know what 2 means, but we're using 2.
Okay. I was just
So
wondering what that 2 meant. But yeah, I can look
you'll
into
have to
that.
look it up.
It's in units per second. So if your units are, meters per second, it would be meters per second per second.
Yep.
So I
this
kind of
is
think of it as 1 over that value is how long it takes to go to full speed. So it would take half a second if full speed was 2.
it doesn't seem to be magic or anything. I mean, it doesn't seem to be super hard. So hopefully you can take this little sample, look some stuff up online. It'll be
Yeah,
easy and obvious.
it seems doable. It's just I guess I've heard of it for Swerve Drive before and making sure like you don't tear off the treads, but that's like the only context I've really heard of it.
Yeah, I think it should work well for the situation you're dealing with as well.
And I had another sort of more technical question, and I'm gonna say that I'm not a programmer, so I don't know this, but our lead programmer was mentioning that about like locking on the charge station, like locking the wheels or brake mode. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes when like a triple balance would be tricky or something, he'd mention, oh, maybe one of those teams didn't have a brake mode. So I was wondering, do y'all have brake modes, or is that like a thing that only a few teams have?
I can give my feedback, but I'm curious what everybody else has to say. Anyone? Ian?
Well, we're using tanks, so I guess our brake mode isn't locking the wheels. It's more of just setting the motors to brake mode, which we did because we didn't want to roll down the ramp in case we were docked but not engaged. Which I mean, I don't know if there was ever a match where we were docked but not engaged. I think there was maybe one and we didn't roll off, which so that worked there. I'd say the danger of brake mode is you probably don't want to be in brake mode when you're driving normally, at least if you have a really fast robot. Because as we unfortunately learned in one of our qual matches, that can make it very, very easy to tip.
So it's unfortunate that Jeremiah just left because they're using Tank Drive and they're using the KOP chassis, and myself and one of my programmers helped them put a button on their gamepad when they hit the X button, and that puts their motors in brake mode, and they hit the Y button and it puts them back into coast mode. And so all you need to do is just put a method in your drivetrain subsystem that's called
Yeah,
brake mode, and it just goes through and sets all your motors to brake mode. And
yeah,
then
that's
you
what we
can,
have.
yep. And so
And
that's an
then
easy way to do it. If you're swerve drive, we X our wheels. So we put all the wheels pointing in. So they're all pointing to the center. And we make an X. And we do that. I think we have a button for that on the joystick to do that.
I actually wanted to talk about scouting real quick. I'm the scouting lead for our team, and with the help of Evelyn from Ember, has ended up leading our scouting alliance. And it's always a weird job because there's like times when you're like frantically trying to organize the system, you know, when something goes wrong or when you realize that a scout needs more training, you sometimes need to work with them or talk with strategists. But there's also like times when like you are not really doing anything. And I also know that like our scouts, you know, scouting is like a really rigorous and intense and at times tedious task. And sitting in the stands, I'm like, I am noticing that our scouts, like, there are ways that I'm sure that there are ways that I could be supporting scouts more, and I just don't entirely know what those are. And so I guess for those of you that were more involved with scouting, what are some ways that like you helped your scouts in the stands?
I think that's a really great question. And this is something I've talked with our scouts about. Generally, how it works for us is Thursday or Wednesday, our strategy captain will post the scouting shifts. Every student, as long as they are not even if they're in media, but if they're not on drive team or pit crew, gets assigned a period. Well, they get to assign to shift 1, 2, or 3, and generally they will have 2 times that they need to scout throughout the day. And the first is an hour in the morning, and the second is an hour and a half in the afternoon. And some feedback that I've received is that last half hour in the afternoon is really rough. So that's something that I think we can have a talk on KnightKrawler about as well. But I think mostly it really helps to really show students how their data is used. And like if you're a scout, if you scout on KnightKrawler, you can be part of the strategy discussion Friday night. Like anybody who has data is welcome. Scott, you did the like which teams are you gonna think are gonna be the top 24 like Google Forum competition, and I think that helped a lot of people kind of like really get into it and make it personal. But I think it's mostly like having the why behind it.
We came up with this the night before the competition while we were up for dinner, and so I threw a Google form together real quick and I put all 60 teams on the form, and I slacked out to the students saying, "Hey, see if you can guess who get the most teams right of who are the 24 teams that'll be in the playoffs." And the prize was a case of Mountain Dew and an extra T-shirt. And so I ran the stats this morning, and we had 4 students who beat the mentors, and they guessed 20 out of 24 teams correctly for who made the playoffs. I was shocked. We had 3 mentors who got 19 right, and 4 students who got 20 right. So I think that is something I definitely want to do more of. I want to do more sort of games and challenges around that type of thing, because this year, I don't know what it is, but it feels like this year we have more students interested in learning about other teams' robots and what they can do than any other year that I've been on the team. And I think finding fun ways to get kids willing to walk around the pits and talk to other teams about their robots and really pay attention to matches rather than playing games on their phones. I feel like doing fun stuff like that helps encourage that behavior.
Yeah, and from my perspective as a student, this year, especially compared to like last year, which I felt like all the robots were basically, you know, the same intake, shooter, climber. It felt like this year there was just so many unique and cool designs where like every time I walked around the pit, I was like just shocked by something else. Like, you know, there was there's like arms, elevators. There's the scissor lift on an elevator one. That one looked really cool. There's the Pentagon robot. And like there was just a bunch of cool robots to look at, and it was just so, you know, cool where like I would just walk around the pit and I'd stop at a pit and then I'd be standing there for 5 minutes just looking at it, and then teams would be like, "Do you have any questions for us?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm just looking at," because like they were just all so, you know, unique, and I think that uniqueness was really cool for this game. Like there were some robots with like 5 or 6 degrees of freedom, which was just wild.
Yeah, I had some returning students, you know, who are worried about like, oh, this game's not going to be interesting to watch. And some of my family members came up to Duluth for the day on Saturday, and like even my 8th grade younger sibling who is not interested in robotics was absolutely down to watch the matches and very invested, and like looking at all the different robots. And I think, yeah, I think when you have the pick and place is something that drives a lot of robot diversity. Absolutely.
We had our pit scouts talk to me after their first day of pits because they finished in the first day, and they were like, "Can we do that again?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know if the pit scouting forum works that way, but if you want to talk to other teams, they, like, yeah, you can make another round." And yeah, it was yeah. I think it was really fun to see that like people were having a lot of fun learning more about other robots. Yeah, that was good feedback. I came up with another question about scouting. We sort of trained in scouts like at the competition, mostly during practice matches, and for the most part that worked out well. But we also had a couple scouts that like had never used our scouting form before, and so had a little bit of difficulty adjusting to it. And we, I mean, we are using the same system for our next regional 10,000 likes, but we're also working with other teams that will like this will be like a new system for them as well. And so my question is like, do you what does your like training into the scouting system look like, especially considering like, you know, working with other teams in that? I don't know.
Yeah, for KnightKrawler, scouting begins in the preseason. So we go to MRI and the mini regional, preseason regional. So from that point, you know, students, we usually have a meeting where we kind of like explain what scouting is. We have a video of past years, so nobody knows the rules, even our returning students. And we have them like on the tablets, usually in small groups, like 1 tablet per group. And then as a group, they each look at a robot just like they would individually. And they practice, you know, looking for quantitative data, qualitative data. Then they practice that at one of the preseason events. We have, you know, a smaller version of our strategy discussion going into those off-season event aligned selections. And then by that time, you know, everybody going to competition should be comfortable with the system. Joseph, what do you guys do? You use Google Forms? Is that what you said previously? Okay.
Yeah, we use a form that connects to a sheet, and that's better organized.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our system with the app is pretty similar. It goes to an Excel sheet. But yeah, but I think it works pretty well for us because we start a lot earlier.
Right. Yeah. We used we did the test this year, and me and my friend Karina from the Minibots stayed up like late on the night before the competition creating the entire system, and then we used that system the day after, and we did notice that like a lot of scouts that had scouted at test were like a little bit more trained in than some of our other scouts that had not scouted during that, even though test is like a very different competition than this one. So
I will say that I'm assuming training for scouting would be very helpful. So I had to sub in for a scout last minute yesterday, and previously I'd only scouted 1 match before in my life, and it wasn't for my own team. So it was a very interesting challenge, and I hope I scouted the data correctly. But it was very frantic, and I was like, I can't enter this and watch at the same time. It was tricky, and I think I'm hoping that our team does more training with it in the future at MRI and test.
My deepest, darkest secret is that I've been scouting lead for our team for 2 years, and I'm not actually good at scouting. So a lot of people aren't. It's a skill. It's an acquired skill.
So we realized Friday night that our scouting was not that good. So we're going to have a scouting party on Saturday at school, and we are going to watch the Great Northern Regional, and we are going to sit with our scouters, and we're going to watch matches, and we're going to show them what we're actually looking for in the data and in the comments and we're going to have fun. We're going to and make it a fun day and watch matches from that. We're going to watch matches from other teams that we're going to be facing and look down in the cross and just kind of catch up on where we should have been.
David,
Yeah, we went to state last year and we spent the days leading up to it. We didn't actually end up scouting at state, but we basically pre-scouted all of the robots, and so we spent like the days leading up to that just having like a fun scouting party at practice, and we had snacks and had like a countdown for like the robots left to scout, and it was really fun. So yeah, that's always it.
That's a good idea.
David,
I think
steal
that would
my idea and do the 2014 challenge for playoffs. Mountain Dew moves the world for high schoolers.
I'm going to use that for lacrosse.
Yeah, I think
half the kids did that challenge because they wanted more Mountain Dew.
Yeah, I think, and part of our training is like when we go through and do like in small groups, like we talk about, like we go through the app and we're like, okay, we have a lot of spots for quantitative data, right? Like who's scoring where, but also like when you leave comments, like this is how we want you to leave them. You should sign your name so that we can talk to you about it if we were confused. And I think a lot of that just comes with practice and understanding it. But yeah, I like the idea of doing a scouting party. I think that brings more fun into it, because I know for a lot of students, especially by the end of the day, it's really tiring. And just like having to really solidly focus that whole time is hard.
It's not a lot of fun. It's not, and it's tiring to sit there and focus on one robot in a match. And it's easy to lose concentration on that one robot that you're watching when there's 5 other ones zipping around it out there on the field. And, it's tiring. So we've found that doing like 2-3 matches is about the extent of a student's attention span. And then we swap them out for a couple other students and then give them a little break and then swap them back in and they can do a couple more matches. So, we try to rotate them as much as we can, but we have a smaller team, so they don't get as long of a break, but just kind of trying to keep fresh eyes on a match.
We did something different this year that I don't think we've ever done before. We sat on the end of the field, which made it great to watch the competition because it seemed to be easier to see what was going on when you could see the entire grid. And then we took our 3 scouts that scouted, so we sat so we could see the blue side of the field, and then we had 3 scouts that went to the other side of the arena and they scouted the red side of the field. I don't think we've ever had our scouts sit entirely separate places, but it really helped, I think, a lot with the view to separate them and scout from the end of the field.
Yeah, and I think we also, I can't really speak to before my time on the team, but we had so many more people in the pits for pit scouting this year. Kudos to Mohammed for running that. But like last year, I think I had one person who helped me, but it was just me. And yeah, just me and another kid. And we did all, 60, 70 teams, which was it was a long 2 days, and it took a lot longer. And so it was good having more people, but we also, know how defined our metrics were, and I think it would be good to like do kind of a retro after this. And I don't know, maybe what you guys look for in pit scouting if you do that.
Yeah, I think well, I'll be honest in that like a lot of our pit scouting we didn't use as much as we maybe would have liked. One thing that we did end up using in our pick list, was robot width, which can only really be found in pit scouting. Like that was really helpful to know when looking at like, would it be possible for if we were on an alliance with these two teams, would it be possible to do a triple balance? And so that was like that was a really big thing, and that was one of the few pieces like questions on our pit scouting form that we factored into like the team lookup or like statistics on individual teams in our actual scouting sheet. And so that was a really big thing, and I do appreciate that we scouted that. But I mean, I also I look at pit scouting in terms of like it's just, I mean, it's a fun opportunity. We like assign students to pit scouting because we know like these are students that really like social interaction, and especially with other teams. And I think like, I mean, pit scouting is fun, and I think like even if we don't use the data as much, and they know that, like it's still an engaging task for the students on our team that do it. So
Yeah. In my experience, a lot of students just started showing up and wanted to pit scout randomly. So I just handed them the paper, told them to talk some teams, and they had a lot of fun doing it. I did notice that a lot of teams are sort of vague with their answers. When they're asked where they can get cones and cubes from, they either didn't know or didn't have a preference of which station they got it from. Also, some students started pit scouting the other regional, which made the data a little confusing.
Yeah,
That was
maybe
the confusing thing last year when both pits were in the same area. We had pit scouting data from Northern Lights. We had pit scouting data from Lake Superior. We're like, no, that team's not even in our regional.
Yeah, and I almost think something, when we talk about autonomous, right? We have a drawing of the field, and a lot of teams, it's laminated and they have a whiteboard marker and they're showing you like, hey, this is where our autonomous goes. And maybe that's, I don't really know how you would, I'd have to figure out how to do that as like a data collection, but almost being like, here are the spots where you can pick up and place, like, check the ones there. I think there was a team that talked to us, that talked to KnightKrawler at our pits, and they had two students come up, and one person asked the questions, and the other person was on a Google form filling out the options. And a lot of the options were like, it would be a picture of the field, and it would be like, okay, numbered spots for like where you pick up, right? So like you can pick up from the ground, that's spot 1. You can pick up from the single substation, that's 2. And then you would check boxes for, okay, this team can pick up from 1, 2, and 3, or just 1 and 3, stuff like that. And I think that could work to kind of get around that vagueness that you were talking about, Mohammed.
Yeah, and I know that's what the No Mythic Ultraviolet Emperor Scouting Alliance did. And I think that worked pretty well for the most part. And the data we collected seemed to all be pretty useful from that. The one thing that was a little wacky, and I guess what we noticed was that, and I guess this is probably just a constant, is that teams usually are trying to sell themselves during their pit scouting. And so we noticed that in pit scouting, sometimes some of the things they said weren't matching up to what we were seeing on the field.
yeah, and that's just generally a challenge with pit scouting, and part of the reason why we don't use that data as much is because like we know that, and so we usually try to like be very specific with our pit scouting. Like when we're creating the form for pit scouting, we try to be like as specific as possible and like try to guide, like have our questions framed in such a way that like guides teams to a specific answer. But like, yeah, that's just always a challenge for pit scouting, and yeah, it's hard.
Final thoughts? Are we gonna meet again next week? And what are we gonna talk about? Favorite flavor of Mountain Dew? I'm happy to I'm happy to schedule something if you guys just want to hang out and chat, or if you have something specific you want to talk about.
Do we want to talk about some of the other top teams or top other big regionals that happened, like the California one, Michigan, I think the Israeli one?
I'll be honest, I'm not gonna have time to watch them, but I'm happy to let you guys talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Citrus
far,
Circus was pretty awesome.
yeah, that regional was like, I think there was like 3 or 4 teams on it in that regional that were on Einstein last year, and like, because there's at least High Tide, Citrus Circuits, and Gray Bots there, and like they were all in the. Actually, no, because Gray Bots didn't even make it to the finals because Rembrandt's 3rd seed was there too. It was a wild regional, and then there's 5 finals matches.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to talk about like how teams are preparing for their next regional? I know that like not all teams will have gone to a regional, but I think it's good to talk about. It's good to see like now that, I mean, for us, we are using this week to sort of recuperate and get our heads in the right spaces and make more of a plan for Minneapolis. But I guess like how teams are preparing for that.
Well, and we should have some teams that visited Great Northern, so we can talk about how that went,
Yeah.
what those folks learned as well. All right, well, let's plan to meet again next week. It might end up being a short meeting, but we might just end up going off the rails and talking about other fun stuff.
Huh.
So happy to do that.
All right, I will plug the notes in the chat one more time for anybody who needs them. I did not connect. I didn't get everything with the slew rate limited discussions, but that's okay. I put the links in there.
People can rewatch the video.
Absolutely.
All right, and I'll try to get the video posted. I did really well last week. I think I uploaded it the same night, but I don't think I'm going to upload it tonight, so it'll be up soon. If anyone wants to rewatch this, relive this experience, or share it with a friend.
Well, hopefully you guys traveling out to Great Northern have better weather.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for anyone who didn't
No
go to
kidding.
Duluth. For anybody who didn't go to Duluth, there was several crashes, teams that crashed on the way out. We almost wiped out. We were very lucky to make it up there. We were very close to being wiped out in the ditch.
Yeah, no mistake. We sort of say we recentered ourselves on the guardrail. So we have a nice little dent in our trailer now. So, but
I heard
nothing
you
wrong.
lost. I heard you lost the bumper on the back of your truck too.
Yes, yeah, it was one of the people's parents was driving up and their truck got a little bit damaged. But nothing actually in the trailer broke, which was really cool. It was all secured nicely. But that was a bit of a goofy thing walking up and seeing a big old dent in the trailer.
We were going down the highway and the truck and the trailer started doing this, and at one point I'm pretty sure we were 90 degrees sliding down the interstate and managed not to go in the ditch and managed not to crash. And we had 2 of our students in the back seat of the truck, and our programming captain was in the back seat through this whole thing, and we get straightened back out and we're driving again. He's like, I gotta finish this paper. He was writing an essay in the back seat, and we're all freaking out, and the adrenaline's going through our hands and everything, and he's like, I gotta get this paper done.
I also had a paper due at 10 p.m. on Thursday night. And we got back to the restaurant we were eating at like 8 p.m. and I was like, okay, it's paper writing time. There's robot code that needs to be changed, but the paper comes first.
Yeah, I think based on this experience, we probably won't let students ride with the trailer again. It's never really considered the idea that bad weather could be a problem, but we need to keep students safe, so that'll probably change our travel plans in the future. Luckily, it all worked out. Everybody got there safe, but close calls, I think, are scary.
It was even scary on the school bus up the next day. Bob was going very fast. I think I would have been more scared if I hadn't slept on the way up, but it's fine.
Yeah. Well, if it wouldn't be right, David, it wouldn't be Duluth if there wasn't weather.
No. I think Rockford left with a better robot than they came up with. So
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Rockford actually rolled their pickup, totaled their truck. It rolled in the ditch. So, but their robot was fine. Other than the bumpers, it sounded like everything was fine.
yeah, we went down to pick them up, and when we got there, they said we're just gonna grab the luggage. We're gonna leave the robot here. We're just gonna go up and watch the competition. And we're like, no, you're not. We're gonna put the robot in our trailer, and you guys are gonna compete. If we need to rebuild it tomorrow, we'll rebuild it tomorrow. And and we got up to the competition. We noticed the bumpers were broke, so we cut them new plywood. Teams were bringing them motors. The bumpers got rebuilt. Their arm got rebuilt, and they competed all weekend. So, and they had a blast.
A great story for first, because that's what we're all
Mhm.
about. All right. Well, watch for an email. I'll send out an invite for next week. Thanks everybody for joining. Great conversation this week. I love that the students contributed so much this week. So please bring more students. Let's keep this going and having more student conversation. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Hi.
Bye.
Thank you.